Okay, we have my favorite guest back on the show, Jordan from Hoop Vision 68.
Thanks for having me, Roger. I'm glad to be back.
Okay, so let's get right into it. I don't want to waste any time. So there's a great debate in Taiwan amongst the basketball community about who started the three-point trend, right? Whether it's the James Harden Rockets or the Stephen Curry Warriors. And I heard that you have a different take on that, Jordan. Do you want to share that with my audience?
Yeah, so there's been a few teams throughout NBA history that were ahead of the three-point trend. The one that I just made a video on about a month or two ago was the 2009 Orlando Magic, which, if for your viewers that might not remember that team as well as, you know, the Rockets or the Warriors of recent times, they had Dwight Howard surrounded by four shooters. And what was kind of revolutionary at the time was Rashard Lewis was playing power forward. In the video I talk about, it was kind of by accident that happened. Tony Battie was the starting power forward for Stan Van Gundy was the head coach, and he went down with an injury, and kind of by necessity they had to play Rashard Lewis at the power forward spot. When he signed with the Magic, it was kind of under the assumption that he was going to be playing small forward, going to be playing the three, but that went out the window when Battie got hurt, and then they stuck with it moving forward. And that team did a lot of stuff that is now very common in today's NBA, but at the time wasn't quite as common in terms of ball screens, pick and rolls with Dwight Howard rolling to the basket when the defense gets sucked in on Dwight Howard, kicking it out for threes. Now, the one thing that team didn't do a lot of, which I would argue that, you know, Steph and the Warriors have kind of popularized the most out of anyone, although you can make a good case for James Harden too, is the off the dribble three-pointers. That Magic team didn't take, and Stan Van Gundy has even been quoted as saying they didn't really like off the dribble threes. So they were taking a ton of catch and shoot threes. They were playing spread pick and roll, but those, you know, when Steph pulls up from 30 feet in transition or whatever, that we didn't see that quite as much from that Magic team. But I do think that they did have a pretty big influence on the league regardless.
To add to that, I think it's kind of ironic, though, how Stan Van Gundy was sort of revolutionized the game, but at the same time, now he's been kind of old school or stuck in his ways with the Pelicans, right? And now he's kind of out of the league because of that. So it's funny how it came full circle, I think.
Yeah, it's the fine line between being a hero and a failure as a coach. You know, it's easy to go one way or the other.
Okay, so the other thing I want to talk to you about is your most recent video that almost is getting it's about to get over 1 million views on this, right? So it's I watched an NBA game from every decade. So talk to us about maybe what you have learned from that video and just the things that you didn't know that you picked up just from watching those games.
Yeah, so the concept was to watch one game from the 50s, 60s, 70s, and so on. And I think what I especially learned was I probably had never sat down and watched a full game from the 50s, 60s, or even the 70s. You know, like I think I'd probably seen the Larry Bird, Magic Johnson era in the 80s before, the 90s, of course, with Michael Jordan. But those early years was what I learned the most. And especially about how the game was officiated back then and how referees kind of called the game. There's definitely a lot of false narratives out there about old school basketball. One thing, this is strictly 50s, 60s. The game was not physical at all. Like on any sign of physicality or contact, refs were calling fouls. One thing I pointed out in the video was offensive fouls, especially. Like anytime a offensive player kind of created contact, the defensive player didn't have to fall down or even really set up for a charge. It was going to be called an offensive foul just for creating contact. So relatively speaking to today's game, it's actually much more physical, even though, you know, we hear how the league is so soft now and all this, but compared to the 50s and 60s, it's much more physical. And then, of course, other big rules, the way ball handling and traveling and carrying the ball was very different. One thing that I didn't hit on enough in the video was the palming rule, where you weren't allowed to have your hand underneath the ball on a crossover, which is very different from today's game. And that affected dribbling, but dribbling was very different back then. In the video, I counted how many times in a game from the 60s they used their right hand versus their left hand, and players didn't use their left hand as much. So the skill level was different. The way the game was officiated was different. And skill level and athleticism as well was another thing I noted. In the 70s, Bill Walton was versus Dr. J was the game that I looked at there. And on one of the first plays of the game, Bill Walton rolled to the basket and dunked the ball, a pretty big time dunk. And I realized, like, wait, that didn't happen in the 60s and the 50s. Like, I hadn't seen any of those dunks. And so by the time the 70s rolled around, we started to see athleticism that was more comparable to today's game.
Okay, so since you mentioned Dr. J, I have to ask. Recently, I did a video on who I think are the top 15 best players that ever played in the NBA. And one of the players that I left out was Dr. J. So you mentioned in your video that his dribbling wasn't, that great compared to the small forwards of today's NBA. Is it fair to say that if Dr. J was to play in today's NBA, like, his dribbling would need to pick up, right? His dribbling wouldn't survive in today's NBA. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I do agree with that. The big debate on when you're making your top 15 list or your top 10 list is it relative to that era? You know what I mean? So if you dropped George Mikan, who played in the 1950s, in today's basketball, he would be really, really bad. Like, objectively, he would not be good. But for the 1950s, he was the first superstar in the NBA, And so I think, looking at your list, and I'll ask you this now, it seems like you didn't do it that way, right? You're saying, yeah, exactly.
Because my focus is on the best player that ever played in the NBA. So I look at whether or not their game is transcendent to any era, right? So my take is that I think, for example, Kawhi Leonard. People had a problem with me putting him number 15 overall. But I feel like his game, he can dribble, he can shoot off the dribble, he can do catch and shoot, he's got mid-range game, he's got three-point game, and he can defend. So I think his game, if you put him back in the 50s, he can still play. But it's not the same way the other way around if you take another player from, the 60s and the 50s. So those are kind of my reason why I didn't place, the old players in my list. And another guy that I left off my list, and I want to ask you, is Wilt Chamberlain. When he played, because I honestly, no disrespect to the player, but I feel like if you take JaVale McGee, if you take him through a time machine and maybe put him back in the 60s, I think he will do just as good as Wilt Chamberlain, if not better. Is that, am I crazy?
I think you could be a little bit crazy, a little bit. I mean, I tend to agree with you in general on all this. Like, the game evolves. I mean, the player pool is bigger nowadays. It's global. So, like, I do tend to agree with you. I would still probably have Wilt Chamberlain somewhere on my top 15. He was... For that time, he was a transcendent athlete. A lot of these guys would not be as athletic as, a Giannis or whoever today. I think Wilt Chamberlain's athleticism would hold up. That being said, if you did just drop him into today's game with no time to practice or modern skill development, I don't know how he would fit in offensively because, there's not that much posting up going on now, and he would have to learn how to be a pick and roll man to the basket. But the argument here for having the Larry Bird and the Wilt Chamberlains on the list is there were such talents, they would figure it out eventually. They would figure out how to play in the modern game eventually. Maybe right away, not so much, but they would figure it out eventually.
Yeah, that I absolutely agree, especially Wilt. I think his ability to learn. And also I watched videos where he was doing fadeaways back in the 60s, right? But whether or not how effective that would be in today's game, I don't know. But I've seen him in clips doing fadeaways in the game. So that's something, you would never hear people do in the 60s. But you know whose fault that is, though, that I don't have him top 15? It's actually your fault. Because for the longest time, I had him in my top 15. But after watching your video, you know, from every era, I realized how deficient their skill level was back in the 60s. I don't know if this is fair to say, but it's people can't even shoot a jump shot properly back in the 60s. You know, if you take today's level of shooting, like it's just not even the same. So
all your fans that are mad at you for having Kawhi 15 and Will, just they can direct the hate towards me instead of you. Direct it towards me.
That's right.
Hit the subscribe button on my channel before you do it, you know?
Yeah, I'm gonna put the link in the description. So go subscribe to Hoop Vision and watch his video. Now, another player I want to discuss with you though is Larry Bird. So I don't have him top 10. And again, it's your fault. Because I watched your video from 1985 finals that you analyzed, you know, between the Celtics and the Lakers. Very classic matchup. And from that matchup, what I learned is that they run floppy action all day with Larry Bird. All he did was catch the ball in mid-range, and he can decide what to do with the ball. But you mentioned, like in the video, even if it's a wide open jump shot, like Larry Bird is not taking that three, right? His game is take that mid-range or drive to the basket. So I feel like that, like, how do you convince me that's going to translate in today's NBA? I don't know. Like, again, I think you were right in that if give Larry Bird time, I'm sure he will be, you know, an all-star level player. But the question is he going to be Larry Bird? Right? I don't feel like he will.
Yeah, I do agree with what you're saying. Based off of that, it's not like I was trying to find a game where Larry Bird didn't play well. I just picked the best video quality I could find from the 1980s, you know, and based off of that game, yeah, it was a lot of floppy action and honestly a lot of feeding the post. Kevin McHale was amazing in that game, and then Robert Parrish as well. Larry Bird didn't necessarily stand out that much in that game, and so going off of that game alone, I would be fine with having him 11 like you do. I will say one system that I do think he would fit really well in today's NBA is the Warriors with their off-ball movement and stuff like that.
Whoa! Are you sure about that?
Yes, most of the league plays in pick and roll and ball screens and with the ball in your hand. The floppy type of stuff is moving without the ball, cutting. What do you think here? What do you think?
No, it's just that you know, a lot of my audience, they're either Warrior haters or they're huge bandwagon fans. So when you mention the Warriors, like it's just I can only imagine what the people that are watching right now, like how they would feel. But my question would be, what position would Larry Bird play even? He can't play the three.
Why not?
He's too slow. He won't be able to guard anyone.
That is something that's really difficult to assess. Like, it's so hard to compare athleticism from like we can't do that. What he would look like in a game, you know. Offensively, he would be very good at, you know, all those like little screening and off-ball movement and reading the defense that the Warriors do. He would be a great fit for that. Athleticism is very hard to see on. It's hard to watch a game from the 1980s. Then watch a game from today and be like, this player is more athletic or less athletic. It's just so hard to do that, you know?
But don't you think the lateral movement, though, that kind of translate on the tape, does it not?
Maybe a little bit, yeah. And I didn't focus a ton on defense in the Decades video. It was much more offensive focused. But defense was so much different back then because that Celtics-Lakers game is the best example where they were sagging off of the on-ball defenders, if you remember that from the video. And that actually did kind of help lateral quickness when guarding didn't matter quite as much because you weren't getting up and, you know, so you could sag off and give the ball handler a little bit of space when they weren't willing to take that off the dribble three. So I guess you are right that would be a big change for not just for Larry Bird, but anyone moving up to today's era.
Right. And that's basically what LeBron is doing from time to time, right? Just sagging off, and then he gets flamed for that, like nowadays, right? People make fun of him for not playing defense. But so it's totally unacceptable in today's NBA, but back then that's how they play. Like I remember another play from your video was Magic Johnson would bring the ball up, and then the defense would just sag way off. Like they don't even like respect his shot, like his jump shot at all. And then he wouldn't even try to take it. It's like the defense is daring him to shoot. He has the ball at the top of the key, and then he's looking to pass. You know, that's something that really amazed me, and that's the reason why I don't have Magic Johnson top 3 either. I had him in the 3rd spot, but because of that video, I pushed him down to the 4th. You know,
I just didn't realize how influential my video could be on someone's top 15 list. Very influential.
For sure. I based my entire list off of your video. I'm not even kidding.
Let me ask you this. This is beyond my pay grade here, but I see that you have LeBron over MJ. I want to hear what your stance is here.
It's so easy. Like, there's no debate. Because to me, LeBron, he has been so great for so long. So that's reason number 1. And then number 2, look at the teams that Jordan beat. Utah Jazz, are you kidding me? Or Sonics? None of the teams that he beat. Trailblazers, you got the Phoenix Suns, you got, you know, the old Lakers. Whichever team you want to pick. The teams that LeBron have beaten, it's way better than any teams that Jordan has ever beaten. Especially Utah Jazz. I cannot, for the life of me, give them the respect maybe they deserve. Because I feel like the only reason why they were good is because they exploited the system. The illegal defense. That's the only reason, in my opinion. That's like James Harden, you know, getting all these fouls because he exploited certain rules. It's the same reason why people don't give James Harden the respect that he maybe deserves, because they say that, you know, he's only exploiting the rules, and now they change the rules, and look at him, he's struggling on the Sixers now. I can't put Jordan number 1 because of that. His competition wasn't as good as LeBron's. LeBron's has been greater for longer. The one thing I have to give Jordan respect, though, is that he's won scoring titles. And with those scoring titles came with championships each time. So that's the one thing that people have never done that. You look at Allen Iverson when he won scoring titles. Look at maybe KD when he won scoring titles, or Tracy McGrady. They couldn't do what Jordan did. So as far as dominating the 90s, for sure, Jordan was more dominating in his era compared to LeBron. But I think the overall greatness and the competition that LeBron faced, I can't give the number 1 spot to Jordan.
For me, it'd be 1A and 1B. It would be hard for me to pick, but what you were saying in the beginning is probably LeBron's best argument. I'm sure you're familiar with Thinking Basketball, Ben Taylor, that YouTube channel, and he did his Greatest Peak series. And another nuance to this top 15 thing is, are you ranking them as in their best season, they're at their highest peak, or the longevity of their career? If you look at the longevity of LeBron's career, that's his best argument. If I'm going greatest peak, I would probably lean towards Michael Jordan a little bit. But, you know, for me, they're 1A and 1B.
Agreed. Like, I'm not going to hate on you if you have Jordan as your GOAT. That's something that, you know, I came to realize, is that probably at this stage of LeBron's career, most people are still going to have Jordan as their GOAT. And that's fine. Anyways, let's wrap this up. Is there anything you want to say to my audience before we take off here?
Well, I actually want to say thank you to your audience. The first time that I came on here was at the time when you posted that. It was the most subscribers I had gained in a single day from going on your show. So a big thank you to your audience. And they were in the comment sections on some of my most recent videos saying Roger sent me and all that. So you do have a very loyal fan base, and yeah, I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me on again, Roger.
Go subscribe to Jordan from Hoop Vision 68, everyone. Okay? That's it for today. Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.